Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Jason. I'm really super happy to be here. It has been an awesome eTUG. Let's definitely agree upon that. And in fact, I really love the way this whole thing was set up. I love the way that eTUG committee got our input, identified the top 5 issues that we were interested in, learning about, want to share, and made that the theme of the conference, right? And so I hope to touch upon all of these during this talk as well. I was here and enjoyed Simon Bates' talk yesterday, and I thought that was a great kind of way to look at things. So I'm definitely going to try to touch upon all of these as well as we go on. Okay, so why are we here? What are we going to talk about? Well, really, this keynote plenary is really for you. I have for you today several things I hope you can start using. Well, if you're keeners on a Saturday, that would be tomorrow. I'll let you wait until Monday to start using these, okay? But basically, I'm going to introduce to you several new learning and development models that I, along with my colleague Myra Travin, have produced over the last couple of months. And we're going to take a look at them, and I'm going to harness the brain power in this room because there will be 2 activities where I want you to give me your thoughts about these models. Are they helpful? How could they be better for you? Those kinds of things. And I'll be sharing out all the results with you as well after the conference through the eTUG website. I'm also going to be, swiping my phone right, sharing with you a case study of actually applying these models to an actual online course. I'm a sessional instructor at SFU as well, and so I'm going to show you the Canvas site that I created for my students in the fall, where I tried to apply these models that we're going to talk about. Okay, so we have 2 models for discussion. First model we're going to talk about is the learning and development model. Now, I'm sure probably a lot of you in the audience are familiar with this classic software model. So I was wondering, how am I going to set some context for this model? And I thought there's actually 2 veins we have to look at here. We have to look at the software development vein, and we have to look at the instructional design vein, okay? And these 2 things, by the way, are now united forever, okay? And so this is what we're going to look at today. So here's a classic waterfall model. If you've been involved in software production, you are familiar with this. It's been used a lot in project management as well. A little bit of history about this model. It was done in 1970 by a fellow, his last name was Royce. Interesting. In his paper in 1970, he warned about this one-directional approach, likely being the cause of software failures. But people just loved this simple model so much, it was actually used while he himself, in the original paper, warned not such a great idea. But anyway, it is part of our world and definitely still used by some software houses today. Around 86, 87, the user-centered design model came to be more popular, if you will. And in this model, we see that we have, users and their needs as really the center point of this model. We have an iterative design process now. By the way, quick poll. How many of you have used a user-centered design model in your own projects in the past? Put up your hands. Okay, so we got some hands. Excellent to see, right? So this model is, because being user-centered, helps us produce better software for our audience. Excellent. Then, around, do you believe it's like over a decade now? I believe Agile Manifesto around 2001, 2002, right? So Agile is about a lot of things more than just process, so bear with me, I know that, but I'm just showing you this process model, okay? Talking about really short sprints, talking about really, 2 to 6 weeks of development time before you check in with your customer or your users, and there's a lot of nice things about Agile. It's not just iterative, it's incremental. It's trying to get workable software in the hands of your audience sooner and then build it out, versus this huge one-shot delivery kind of mechanism that's more common in the waterfall model. Question, how many of you have used an agile method in your software projects? 1, 2, couple of hands only, okay, but a couple of you, that's good to see too. All right. I'm sure you're familiar with this little baby here, right? So now we're talking about instructional or learning design. 1975, the Army had to do a lot of training. They had to come up with a way to deliver all that training. They created a process, and ADDIE was born. This is the original ADDIE model. It's from what I could find on the net. And you can see it's not iterative. You can see there's multiple phases. I know you're all familiar with it. I will not bore you and ask you, have you ever used ADDIE in a project? But it is a very popular approach in our field in general, a bit less so these days. Now, there has been some updating of ADDIE, right? Now, very often, ADDIE is promoted as being at least iterative with some kind of a cycle of development, which helps things along. But still, a lot of issues are with ADDIE. For instance, it doesn't give us much guidance about how we do these steps, and there's still kind of these very ominous large chunks of things that we have to do. But definitely making some progress on the learning design with making it at least iterative. Now, around 2012, Michael Allen proposed a different development model for learning design called the Successive Approximation Model, or abbreviation of SAM. His inspiration was trying to marry the standard, if you will, and structural design models that we're more familiar with the agile development process. He proposed basically two SAM models. This is the SAM 1, should have like a shirt. And in this model, you can see it's an iterative cycle of just 3 phases, evaluating, design, developing. Notice that it starts at evaluate, which I actually quite like from a design perspective. And also, it can be kind of built upon for more complex things. This is the very simple model. He's also proposed the SAM2 model, where you have a preparation phase, you go through some background work, maybe even some iterative prototyping, and then you do an iterative design phase, iterative flow, and then you move on to an iterative development phase. And again, iterative again, and focusing on development. Question for the crowd, how many of you have used the SAM model with a learning or software project? A couple of you. Okay, very interesting to see. SAM is less known, and when SAM came out, there was some kerfuffle in the community, and goodness knows, maybe I'm going to cause a kerfuffle today, calling it an alternative to ADDIE when some people didn't see it that way. But here's where I'm going, okay? This is, for me, one of the newest models that I can find related to learning design in the world that we live in today. Technology soaked everywhere, right? Looking at this model, while, by the way, I have used this process and I do like it, looking at this model, where is reference to learning? This is my challenge here, right? I see this model, I've used this model, I like this model. By the way, the books are solid too. But when you look at how to help instructors go online, I just want to see everything in one place to help me frame how does learning and technology work together now in this world we live in. This model is definitely a great step forward, but it lacks that contextual stuff for me about learning and technology. Okay, so now let's take a look at this learning and technology development model. I'm going to bring it up. By the way, there's handouts on the table, so everybody can clearly see the model once I bring it up. It's the figure 8 model. It's a double-sided paper you've got, so it's the figure 8 model. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it, or actually, you know what? I'm going to shut up for a moment, and I would like you to just take a minute to look at the model and take it in before we start our discussion. And there will be an activity where I'm going to get you to share your thoughts. Now, a little bit of background about this model. My colleague Myra Travin, who's one of the smartest people I know in learning design, she's got 20 years of experience in the field. She and I have been working on a couple of models in the past, and she challenged me to try to visualize the ideal process that I try to achieve myself when I do my own online course development and things like that. And so that's where this model comes from. So let's first take a look, now that you've had a chance to look at the model, let's take a look at a brief definition, okay? So the brief definition is it's an iterative development approach that takes into consideration 3 pillars. 3 pillars: learner needs, user experience, and technology. That, to me, is now the requirement of knowledge for delivering the kind of online experiences that we do. It can be through a team, perhaps rarely it's through an individual, but those are the 3 pillars. Think about your projects today. Who's got competencies on those 3 things, or as a team, are those competencies covered? This is critical now. Those three pillars work all together to support continual improvement and a unified development strategy. So that is my official definition so far of the model. So a couple of key points before we move into our first activity where you're going to share your thoughts about what you're seeing so far. So first key point, this one model unifies learning, technology, and learner experience. And by the way, I am very upset these days. I see some chatter on the Twitter streams these days about trying to define learner experience as a subset or something different from user experience. I completely professionally disagree. Learner experience is only user experience in its totality in a specific context. In a specific context. It is not a subset of user experience design, not somewhere special. It is user experience design with the context of learning. That's the way I think it should be looked at. Okay, what's next? It's an example of a domain-specific design process model. When you look at this model, you should know what domains it's talking about. It's talking about learning and using technology. It works, and it's intended anyway, and you're going to let me know over time, it's intended to work with various development processes. So if you use waterfall in your shop, if you use agile in your shop, you can still use this model as a guide of steps along the way for development. Let's see what else. It scales up and down. So originally, when I kind of put this down on paper, it was more meant for individual features, because I do piecemeal development myself. I don't come up with this massive, huge plan. I do usually, what's my learning objective for one particular thing, develop that out, next one please, and continue. But it can be scaled up, and it can be used for whole entire learning objects, if you will, or even whole entire learning environments, I suppose. More on this even with an entire course coming up next. It identifies these key competencies. Like I say, in the world we live in, technology, in other words, software development, user experience, and learning design. Those three things all together. The model is iterative in nature. If you notice, there's actually no end in a way. It can keep going, and it's meant to support continuous improvement. Because what I've learned as an instructor is even when I deliver in September this online environment for my students, I'm not done. Like, it's going to grow and change with that class. And then next term, I'm not done. I'm going to have to grow and change with it, right? So you're always working on that element. Now, here's a little story, and Tony's with us today, which is great to see. So Myra and I were working on this model, and I had put it out there on LinkedIn and published it a little bit. And I thought to myself, you know, who would I really love to send this model to get a little bit of feedback? Now, I knew Tony from way back at UBC, and I thought, well, you know, I might send it to Tony. And what I really was expecting is, you know, I was looking forward and welcoming his critical feedback on this model. And so you can imagine my surprise when it's like, I got this great little note from Tony, extremely friendly, and he was very interested in the model. And he saw that this model actually works really well with this sections model. Let me show you how. So in the learning and technology development model, there is a particular step called assess technology fit. You know, we always have this problem. We always have a lot of people confusing technology as a leading indicator rather than learning need. So in order to help that, this model puts technology in its place, to me, which is to help achieve your learning objectives. And so there's this stage called assess technology fit. But in the model, I never defined how one would do that. And this is where Tony's sections model comes in. Because by putting in the sections criteria of students' ease of use, cost, teaching functions, interaction, organizational issues, networking, novelty, and speed and security, now you have these two models working together. Well, you have a criteria, I believe it's a checklist of 39 items in sections. And so now you've got something from the learning world coming into this model that's all about learning and technology now working together. So, and so the way that Tony saw it, and if I'm incorrect, let me know, but he saw it as also a model to actually even frame course development, online course development at a high level, of course, right? So again, the model scales up and down with its usage. So I want to share that as an example use of the real world because this model is so new. That's the one example that I know of so far, and hopefully after today, if you like what you see and if you use the model, then you can start sharing with me your use and applications and the way that you might find it useful for yourselves. Okay, so before we have our activity, we're going to have several breaks for Q&A as well. I don't know where the mic is or if I'm going off script here. Is that okay? I just want to check in with everybody and see, before we break for our first activity, if there's any questions that you have before we do so. We're all pretty good so far? Okay, that's great. So this is what I hope this kind of ends up being, and that is it's a way for you to work together at your table to discuss, critique, and see how you might be able to use such a model. I'm looking for your honest feedback. The feedback that you leave, and I want you, by the way, if you can, to leave the handouts on the table when you go. They'll all be collected, and then working with Leva, we'll share all that feedback out to the community. Okay, so it's fully transparent, okay? And so I've got a couple of questions I'm hoping you'd like to discuss at your table, right? I'm hoping you'd like to write down any questions you might have about this model once I give you a couple of minutes to reflect upon it, okay? I'm hoping that you might see a way that you might utilize this model. I'm also very interested in what strengths you see in the model, and also, of course, what opportunities for improvement, right? Now, whatever else your table would like to discuss and comment on, that would be fantastic. So I'd like to suggest is, why don't you just take a minute or two for each of you to kind of think about these questions in the model. I'll make a noise, someone will make a noise, then you can start talking with each other and maybe working and sharing your ideas. And then what we'll do in maybe 5-10 minutes, go around and maybe have just a couple tables maybe share a highlight of what they kind of discussed. Okay, sound good? I'll kind of walk around a bit. If you have any questions, just put up your hand, I'll come around. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay, great. So I'll give you some peace and quiet, and we'll check back with you in a little bit. Thank you. Okay, everybody.
Check.
Definitely some good discussion going on. I was able to eavesdrop on a couple of folks. So what I'd love to do now is if we had maybe 1 or 2 tables that could just share like a highlight comment. But remember though, we're not going to lose anything. As long as you've got stuff written down, we're going to collect these papers and we'll share out. But if we could just have 1 or 2 tables volunteer to share a highlight comment, that would be great. Jason's got the mic. Do we have anybody? Oh, we have somebody over there. Thank you very much.
Hello, hello.
Thanks. Well, we were commenting on the fact that the strength of this model was in having the technological fit come in later in the process after the learning needs were met. But that then led us to wonder about whether at that step, when you were assessing the technology fit, whether part of that analysis included analyzing the learners, how well that technology fit the learner's needs. Because if you hadn't at the outset figured out maybe that the set of learners you were trying to reach either didn't have access to certain technologies, etc. If you hadn't done that, then you might design a technology fit that fit the methods that you wanted, but that didn't take that into account. So it's a possible vulnerability.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and I think that's where it's critical to think about the students at that assessed technology fit, just like you described, Because for instance, for me, when I choose technology, I'm even thinking about, are my students already using this particular technology? That will help me, feel comfortable about using that technology too. So that's excellent feedback, thank you. And I think that's a key thing for me to highlight is it's students making sure their needs are met in that access technology fit. Thank you. One more, please. Go ahead, thank you.
I just want to start by saying I am not an instructional designer. I'm an instructor. I'm just a little bit confused with, to me it reads as though you evaluate prior to delivery. I think I might be missing something though.
Okay, very good point. So in the evaluate stage, I'm thinking really it's more likely you're going to be testing out at one stage perhaps a prototype on some learners before you deliver it like on campus or you actually roll it out to your whole class. Or if it's nearer to the end of development, that could be maybe using your whole class as a way to evaluate that. But by evaluation, I really mean applying user experience design evaluation techniques. So in other words, maybe getting a small number of learners and actually seeing if they can figure out how to navigate. What kind of organization are you using? Is that effective? Do they find the material relevant? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and there'll be a handout for you to download to help you assess learner experience. Because I think that has to be separated from instructional objectives. I think we want the learner experience to be positive, but that doesn't mean they're going to meet their instructional objectives. I think you have to do both. So that's why in that cycle, there's evaluate learner experience, and then again, looping around again, it's evaluating your instructional objectives, finding out any performance gaps. Does that answer your question? Okay, and I'm the same as you. I'm just an instructor, so cool. It's great. Okay, thank you very much. All right, so we'll continue. And thanks to everybody participating in that activity. We'll do one more on the other model in just a moment. Okay, so I mentioned two models today. So the second model is the learning ecology framework. And by the way, these two models were originally kind of seen as partners, but you can use one or either model. You don't have to use both at the same time. So here's some background. So David Porter is there. Thank you, David. So David actually kind of helped me identify a real early pioneer in the idea of learning ecologies online, Bonnie Nardi. We had a conversation a while back, and David introduced me to Bonnie Nardi, and I was surprised actually I didn't run across her, because in the 90s I was like a fiend for interactive CD-ROM stuff, and Apple Computer was doing stuff in the education space, and so I was familiar with a couple of names, but not Dr. Nardi's, pardon me. And she wrote this book along with O'Day in 1999, and they defined an information ecology. It's a great book. It's still available. I was able to download it. She has a really interesting way of looking at technology. She doesn't look at technology as a tool. She looks at it more as a system, that we affect technology, and technology affects us, and that will always be. Rather, if you look at it as a tool, which I traditionally looked at, so pillar me now, but if you look at it as a tool, you look at it as something that you use but will never change you. It's really an important insight, I think, that she had 25 years ago. So she has this definition of an information ecology, which is the closest thing I could find to an early idea of a digital learning ecology, as a system of people, practices, values, and technologies. Don't I love it that she has those four things together? That is so good. In a particular local environment, the spotlight is not on technology, but on human activities that are served by technology. 1999. Wow. That's pretty good stuff. Pretty good stuff. Okay, so that's a little background in 1999. Now when I try to find digital learning ecologies a little bit more recent, I come across George Siemens, who defined this in 2008. And this was what I was more familiar with before the conversation with David. So George Siemens refers to a learning ecology as an ecology, for the purposes here, can be viewed as an environment that fosters and supports the formation of communities and networks. Who can name a learning ecology that we all use today? What's that? eTUG. Well, you could look at eTUG in that way, but I'm talking about like a massive digital learning ecology that we all use, I would wager, every day. The internet. The internet is the motherlode of learning ecologies, right? So here is George Siemens' illustration. And it is an excellent model to refer to by means of looking at learning as a taxonomy, or taxonomy-based view of learning. It gives a great breakdown of informal learning, community, self-learning, performance support, mentoring and apprentice, games, and breaks it down even into conduits and learning concepts. So this is great stuff, and this was very insightful for myself to kind of look at all the different elements that could be in a learning ecology. So I think this model is excellent in terms of a taxonomy. But as an instructor, wanting to leverage a learning ecology on my online courses or blended learning courses, this doesn't give me the structure that I need for guidance. It's an excellent taxonomy model, though, but it doesn't give me the guidance that I hope to provide with the model coming up. All right, so let's take a look at the learning ecology framework. I'll give you a moment. Again, it's on the flip side of your handout. Take a look at the screen, take a look at your handout. I'll come back in 1 minute. Thank you. Okay, so this model really originated with Myra Travin, okay? And like I said, Myra Travin has over 20 years of experience in learning design. And really, I think, this model represents a lot of stuff, okay? You notice that in this model, and I collaborate with Myra on later versions, it even talks about using XAPI and going to a learning record store to store summative and formative information. So this model is really something that also can move us forward with online learning spaces. But this model can also be used right away, I feel, as an instructor to complement and better deliver learning resources to my students. So let's take a look at Myra's definition of a learning ecology framework: an educational philosophy and self-supporting ecosystem in which individuals and groups are offered a collection of curated resources and tools that will support their growth and learning and foster participation. As an instructor, I love that definition. That is really where I want my students to go. And I hope that after I'm done with my one class with my students, that they have this ability to seek out and locate and build their own learning ecologies. That's why this learning ecology framework is so fascinating, because you can look at it from the student viewpoint. By the way, every student of yours is already building learning ecologies. Do you know what learning ecologies they are building? As an instructor, we can also provide learning ecologies to complement courses and also to be used after the course ends. This is a key criteria for me. I know that I'm moving towards a learning ecology in my online courses when the course ends and I'm no longer there, but there's still value being delivered to my students all the time when they visit that space. Okay, so a few key points about this learning ecology framework before we settle in for our second and final group activity. It's a highly structured presentation. I think this is one of the strengths of the model. It actually provides, if you will, a roadmap of different levels of learning tactics to support in a learning ecology. It can be used as a framework to help structure online learning spaces and a diagnostic tool. I've actually started using it as a way to diagnose how is this course doing in terms of providing a learning ecology. Interesting is you look at the diagram and you see the stages going from instructor control to individual learning, relational, and social. You actually, hope everything's okay. Do I need to do anything? Sorry, lost my train of thought here. And so as you go through these stages, you find that you have different levels of learner autonomy required. So in other words, learners who aren't self-driven may not be very effective using social learning tools or methods, but they probably are more effective in terms of individual learner choice, right? Thank you. And also size of learner community. If you've got a small class of 10 learners, setting up a community space for just those 10 learners probably doesn't make a lot of sense. In that case, I would bring those learners into an existing space for them to share and learn from. So that's another key point. And let's see what else we got. And under each stage that you see in the learning ecology map, you can think of these as learning tactics, different ways that you can support learning with your students. I'm not going to use the term learning styles, because that's really not the case as we know now, but I think learning tactics is a much better way to look at that. All right, so guess what? You're going to be up again, and this time I'd like you to focus your discussions on the learning ecology framework. And we've got the same 4 questions. I'll leave them up for you again. What questions do you have about the framework? How might you use this framework? What are the strengths and what are the weaknesses? And again, I'm looking for open, honest feedback, and we will transparently share everything that we get with you in the conference wrap-up posting. Okay? So I'll give you 5-10 minutes again. I'll come around, see if you have any questions or comments, and we'll get maybe a table or 2 to share again, okay? And if you have any questions right away, put up your hand, I'll come around. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, everybody, I hope you've had a few minutes to talk about the learning ecology framework again and see what your thoughts were. We'll do the same thing now if we can. maybe we'll have one or two tables share a highlight of their discussions. And then the next part of the session will be our last part. I'll be looking at a case study of an actual online course using a learning ecology kind of approach, if you will. So Jason's got the mic, I think. Do we have somebody who would share a highlight of your discussions about the learning ecology framework? Share that out, please. No? Oh, okay, go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Hello. Check, check. I have a question about the arrows. Does the model imply that you're supposed to move from one model to
Okay,
another?
yes. So the model does imply basically stages of developing a learning ecology, where instructor control is the stage 0, where we're probably all at right now because we're instructors if you are an instructor. And then the idea is as you proceed through the model, you are adding more learner control, so your learners have to be more self-driven. They also have to, you have to start thinking about the size of your community as well. So they are kind of recommended stages, but you can have maybe relational and not have any social, and vice versa. It's okay. It was just kind of recommended as a general pathway. Does that help answer your question? Great, thank you. Anybody else want to share a question or a comment, pardon me, of their discussions about the learning ecology framework before we move on to the case study? Oh, yes, thank you. Jason, thank you.
So we had a question about the arrows too, so thank you for answering that. But the other question that came up was, what are the formative and summative circles doing?
Okay. So basically the formative and summative circles are just there to indicate that anywhere at any stage of the learning ecology, there could be evaluation happening. And I will be talking about evaluation shortly. And the reason why there's one inside the other is really we couldn't come up with a diagram to have both the same, because, yes, the labeling issues. Yes, classic, right? So that's my cop-out. There you go. But anyway, but that's the idea, is that they're both always present, and the matter is during all stages are possible. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Thank you. Yes?
Wouldn't you want to have a summative ultimately?
Okay, so if you look at the learning ecology model, you'll see that in instructor control, there's a little box that goes final summative evaluation. So that's like the final official summative evaluation, i.e. maybe it's an exam or maybe some other kind of technique, doesn't matter so much, but it's your final summative kind of evaluation. Thank you for the question. Okay, let's see how we're doing on time, 3:17. So I'm going to do my best to, we have 3:30, right, Leva? 3:30? Okay. All right, so I'm going to go through a case study, then hopefully we'll do a little wrap-up activity with your mobile phone or device, and then a Q&A, and then we're done. And I'll give you a link at the end where you can download a bunch of online resources to continue learning about this after the session. Cool? Okay. So here's my quick case study. I'm a sessional instructor at SFU. And over the years, I've always tried to build more complete online learning environments for my students. Last fall, I thought I'd try Canvas, because Canvas is now being more widely adopted at SFU, so I wanted to try that platform. So this is an actual course. I actually had a class of 80 students go through this course. That's a live URL. I made the course public. Shout out actually to Clint Lalonde. Is Clint here? Clint Lalonde? Oh, well, his early work with open textbooks and then BC Campus's work, they inspired me as well. And that's why Myra and I put Creative Commons licenses in all these models. So you guys are responsible for that conversation that I had with Myra, because I thought that's the way to go in the future. Okay, so this is a snapshot of the course. I'm not going to get into a lot of details because I could talk for hours about online course design, but I won't do that. But anyway, this is a little snapshot of the learning course. It's a blended course. It's face-to-face instruction with online components, 13 weeks, 80 students. Third-year computing science students. Very briefly, want to show you my process for designing an online course environment. I use the learning technology development process basically as my overall guide. I use the learning ecology framework as a diagnostic tool and as a framework for delivering more learning opportunities for my students. As a separate download, I've got this handy worksheet to help you create positive learner experience qualities. I don't think we talk about that enough. We talk more about instructional outcomes, which is great, by the way, don't get me wrong, but we also need to talk about the learner experience during that time of reaching those outcomes. And of course, I used a whole bunch of user experience design techniques because I'm a professional UX designer. So there's a whole bunch of techniques that we can steal and use from the field of user experience to help our learning experiences better. And I've been doing this for over 20 years, and now I think we're at the stage where it's so well documented that there's no reason that we can't be leveraging these skills altogether. And of course, student feedback. And particularly when I'm teaching a course on UI design, my students are going to take me to task on the UI design of their course companion. Kudos to them for doing that, right? Okay. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. All of these materials are online. You can go through in detail and read. But basically, you remember those 4 stages of a learning ecology. Let's take a quick look at each stage, right? So instructor control is by default what we all do already. We provide a set of resources to our students, whatever they might be, face-to-face resources, online resources, doesn't matter. And so I just kind of gave you my list, my inventory of tools I use. I'm not going to get into that right now. It's not that important. You can look at that later. But the idea is that we always have a large amount of instructor control to begin with. When are we going to start thinking about, and some of us already do this, I know that for years, moving more control to our learners and giving more opportunity to those type of people. So individual learning, I'm talking about learner control now, where the learner has control over materials. So maybe this is a wiki that you have on your course website where your learners are editing their own resources. Maybe it's a flipped classroom. I use a semi-flipped approach myself with required readings with a rubric they fill in. I'll talk about that if I have time. Multi-device access is a given, providing videos and optional learning resources, and creating, and we all do this already, providing a set of recommended resources. So probably, if you did a quick inventory of your own courses, you're probably doing a lot of this already, which is great. And that's the first stage of the learning ecology. Second stage, going to get a bit more interesting, relational learning. Thinking about how we can support and provide learning through relationships. And I think there's 2 main kind of avenues here with relationships. There is relationships between a student and mentors or coaches or their professor or instructor. And there's also relationships to digital resources like performance support tools. So it can be a personal relationship to me or a digital relationship. So here's a quick example. Cato is an online, modern, real-time communication tool that came out about a year ago. I came across it, and the developers were a great bunch of people to give feedback to, and they were very receptive to me, so I use it for my students. Let's put the tool aside. Here is my vision. It's quite simple, actually. My vision was, I've got 80 students. I want to create for each student a private and persistent space for coaching and mentoring. That was my goal from a learning perspective. So I want to give my students individual and a private access to me, because some students don't want to talk about their learning difficulties in public, and also some students are more prone to discuss things in private. So that was the idea. I happen to use Cato. It's a great tool. If you're familiar with Slack, Slack would be an awesome tool for this too, okay? But this is the idea where in this online space, they could have one-on-one discussions with me. They could also have discussions with groups. We already do that. They already do class forums. This is one-on-one discussion. But here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. Because it's a platform that supports it, if they're talking about an aspect of user interface design I'm less familiar with, I could invite an external expert to join that discussion. And now my student can start to form a relationship with an industry professional and start some learning happening that way. So lots of opportunities. All right, this is a performance support tool I provide for my students. So this tool, in my class, my students have to design, by the way, user interfaces. And for many of them, it's the first time they've ever had to do that. So I want to provide performance support. At the time of need, and Brian and Hope were talking about this last session with the Douglas College session of chicken soup and stuff like that, where as a learner, as a student, they can go to this page and they go, you know what, I'm not sure how to benefit my audience, or I'm not sure how to apply user-centered design. I know you talked about it in class, but what's that all about? They can click on a topic here, and then they get a subtopic of recommended articles, and they can even rate these articles and kind of use an element of social learning to kind of prioritize helpful articles and not. But this is a tool not to help them pass the exam. By the way, I don't have an exam. but this is a tool to help them become better user interface designers. That's my learning objective, right? So this tool could be found in industry as well as education. Okay. Social networking, or social learning, pardon me, i.e. network learning. So looking at one or many-to-many kind of conversations, maybe a community of practice. In my case, I recommended to them a list of experts in the field of user experience design on Twitter, which is an amazing opportunity for them to have. And maybe, providing some group curation, but I didn't do that last term. But here's my little list. So what I did is, Twitter's great, but like, how do you know who's really good out there? Like, when you're new to a field, how do you know who you could learn from and maybe who you could start a dialogue with? So I give them a list of 24 UX experts and other sources of information that they can, if they want to, go on Twitter, start to follow, start to engage, get in the conversation, and have opportunities for social learning. So that was an example of social learning. And by the way, everything that you've seen here, of course, it's multi-device. Like, multi-device is the baseline now, so that's where you want to be. And that's what led me to learning ecologies. Because once my students had this in their pocket and they could access all the materials at any time, it's not just my course anymore that's important. Help my students find the resources they need anywhere in the world. I'll do my best to help that process along, right? For them to be better at design. All right, 325. There's evaluation in the learning ecology framework. And there's two aspects of evaluation. Here's the really cool one, and my colleague Myra is starting to think about this. How do you assess the health and effectiveness of the ecology itself? That's some deep thinking. And Myra is starting to think about that, which is awesome. My focus is kind of more on today and tomorrow. So my focus is on like student learning objectives. And so basically, methods to do formative evaluation. I think the highlight I'd like to share with you is this rubric. How many of you are familiar with the Spunky rubric? Let me introduce you to the Spunky rubric. The rubric is basically 5 questions. It asks a student or a person, after they've read or viewed a video, what did they find surprising? What did they find puzzling? What did they find useful? What did they find new? And what did they know already? Here's what I do. I have a required reading. They have to fill in a quiz with these 5 answers by 10 a.m. of the day of the class. All the data gets put in a spreadsheet. I view that spreadsheet before class. Then I can change up my class. Find out what was misunderstood. Find out what was really interesting to them. Find out what was puzzling to them, and be more effective as an instructor. So that is an example of, and I love this rubric. So it's called Spunky, and you do a Google, you should find it. I really find the students really go for it. Lastly, summative evaluation. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir here. I got my students to create a student choice topic in user experience design, Creative Commons licensed, 2-page kind of article to share if they want with the world, but at least to know about Creative Commons and to license it as such. Okay, so I think we're just about done. Dig out your phone or dig out your mobile device or laptop. I have an online poll for you to wrap up the session, and we'll wrap it up in a couple of minutes here. So if you have a mobile phone, you want to text eTUG 2015 to the number 37607. And then after you get the welcome message, you can text A, B, C, or D to have your choice. Your choices are, which models discussed today are useful for you. Both models are useful, or A. B is just the learning technology model. C is just the learning ecology framework. Or D, neither, and no problem, I'll try again. So that's fine. So, or if you want to, if you're on a device, you can go to pollev.com/eTUG2015. That'll get you up a web page where you can place a vote as well. So why don't I give you just a minute or two, and then we'll wrap up the session right after that. Okay, Plan B. Here we go, Plan B. Plan B is this. Could everyone just have a show of hands, okay? You always have to be able to roll with it, baby, right? You can't be stuck. You can't be stuck. What's that? That's right, always have a backup, always good. Okay, so if you found both models look useful to you, not if you like it, I don't care if you like it or not, do they look useful? Please put up your hand if you think both models look useful to you. What do you think, about half? Oh, taking pictures. Look at this documentation. Thank you. The eTUG team is rolling with it too. Excellent. Okay, down hands, perfect. If only the learning and development technology model looks useful, put up your hand. This is great though, thank you. Okay, got it? Great. If the learning ecology framework is only useful to you, put up your hand. Great. And then if I've delivered to you a big raspberry tonight and there's nothing there for you, you can put up your hand. Don't worry, I won't take it personally. You're very kind. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so let's wrap this baby up then, because it is 3:30. So just give me 1 minute here. I just got to get back on my screen here. Okay, so first of all, I really appreciate you staying. The ice cream, I hope, was a good bribe. I really appreciate you staying for this session. I know it's the end of the conference, and there's been so much going on. It's been a full day. I appreciate your time. There's all my contact info. Now, this link is really important, everybody. This link here, this link will take you to a public folder where you can download Creative Commons licensed images of the framework model, the learning and technology development model, a worksheet to help you create positive learner experiences, and also a copy of all these slides in PDF to further spread out. Okay? So that hopefully should be working. If it's not, you can tell me after the talk. I'll do my best. We'll also share that out with the eTUG post-conference page and all that kind of good stuff. But it is available now for you to use, okay? And don't be shy with critical feedback. I'm going to be presenting this at the Society for Teaching and Learning Higher Education in 2 weeks, and I'm scared about that. So the more critical comments you give me now, the better it will be for me. So don't be kind, be honest. So that's a wrap. I really appreciate your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, let's hear
Thank
it.
you.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Paul.
you very much.